She said she wants a picture with it after church with us. But she said, I'm not going to lay it out to take a picture.
You can sit by John. I'm sitting here so I can see it.
I love her so much, I'll let her do it.
Yeah, I've got enough to play. Did you see it?
No. She just I handed her her pie plate. And handed her I know. She's wearing the Easter dress I made for her.
Okay.
Yeah, and the tagging is my grandmother's around the corner. You see it?
That's Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to be starting 1 Peter chapter 3 this morning, so if you want to turn over there, that'd be fantastic. Last week we had such a great class. I felt like that. Maybe I'm tooting my own horn right there, right? But what made it such a great class, I think, was the good discussion that we had. And really, I hope that if anything that we learned from what we studied last week is that that the Christian's duty is to submit in the same way that Jesus submitted. Jesus sets that example for us, and that's exactly the message that Peter is giving to us in the last part of chapter 2. That Jesus is that example, and he says that you've been called for that purpose, to be like Jesus. Jesus suffered, leaving you an example to follow in his steps, which means that we're going to have to suffer. There's going to be things that we have to go through that we don't want to have to go through. Things that are going to happen in our lives that are uncomfortable. Things that happen that we don't agree with. And Jesus sets the example for us, and we follow in his footsteps to behave in the same way that he did. Now, Peter says, he who committed no sin, nor any deceit was found in his mouth. And while he was being reviled, he did not revile in return. He didn't get people back. While he suffered, he uttered no threats, but kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously. So Jesus, in this example that he is setting, entrusts himself to God, to Him, to God who judges righteously. And that's the example that we have for us that we should follow. That really, when we have things that are happening in our lives that we don't like or we don't agree with, or where we're suffering in any way, then we trust it off to God to let Him handle all of that. And trust Him who judges righteously, because man doesn't judge righteously. We have biases that we have where we want things done a certain way, and we may have our preferences and that. But with God, He knows how to handle those situations. And so in the same way that Jesus entrusted Himself over to God that knows how to handle it, God knows how to sort out all the details. God knows how to handle all of that. And it says, and He Himself bore our sins in His body on the cross so that we might die to sin and live righteous. For by His wounds you were healed, and you were continually straying like sheep. But now you have returned to the shepherd and guardian of your souls. And so we entrust God to be able to handle that. So we are to behave in the same way that Jesus behaved when things don't go our way. He sets the example for us. When things don't end up the way that we would hope they would end up, we trust ourselves over to God. He'll sort out the details. Chapter 3 begins, and it doesn't stop with doesn't begin with a new topic. Peter continues on with this same mentality of what it means to be in submission in the family. Family submission. So he's already talked to us at the very middle part of chapter 2, telling us to submit ourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, government, whatever the case is. Honor all people. Servants are to be submissive. And Jesus is the example. That servant section is chapter 2, verse 18 through 20. Jesus is that example. So now in chapter 3, he continues that thought. But he goes into how a family is to be submissive. And he addresses the wives to begin with. And here's what he says. Let's look at it together. All right, he says this. And I'm going to go through it. I don't know if I did it like this, if I put I guess I did. So let me give you the points that I put up here on the board, and then we'll go over the text. That might be the better way to do this. That probably is the reason why I put it in the PowerPoint that way. All right, so the character of a submissive wife, we're going to see this right from the text, is that she is not spiritually bossy, verse 1. She's pure and respectful, verse 2. And she's confident like Sarah, verses 3 through 6. That's right from the text. So now let's read the text and find out. Okay? Here's what he says. In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. Your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry, or putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you have become her children. You do right without being frightened by any fear. So, first of all, she's not spiritually bossy. Notice what he says, without a word. It means without showing off her spiritual knowledge or pointing out her husband's spiritual failures. And you have to remember, notice what he says here in the text. Wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that if any of them are disobedient to the word, we're not talking about ones that where the husbands are believers and the wife is a believer and they're following Christianity. We're talking about a situation where a wife is married to somebody who's disobedient to the word. What is she supposed to do in this situation? And Peter gives us instruction right here. She's not going to be spiritually bossy, but instead, she's going to be able to win him over, one without a word, by the behavior that she has in her life. So she's able to guide him and lead the husband by her own behavior. But notice what it says, without a word. Isn't that interesting? A lot of times when we talk about preaching the gospel or preaching the word, we talk about saying words. But here it's talking about her behavior more than anything else. More than anything else. It's her attitude, it's her behavior. And she can do a lot of good, is what Peter says, when she does it this way. She is also pure and respectful. Verse 2, she's sexually pure. She's respectful in the sense that submission is sincere and not merely just lip service. She's not saying, well, fine, I'll just do whatever you say. That's just saying the words, and the attitude is not there. And so instead, her behavior, she's respectful, she's pure, she's sincere in her behavior towards her husband. Verse 2 says, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. Chaste and respectful behavior. And I think that's interesting. He goes on to say, verse 3, your adornment, and he gives more details, and this is a cultural thing, right? Your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair or wearing gold jewelry or putting on dresses. Nothing wrong with any of those things, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry or putting on a dress. Some of you may be doing that even this morning, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But it must not be merely external. Not merely external. There's something that's more important than just the way that you look. It's the way that your attitude is. It's the way that your character is, and the way that you respond to other people, and especially your husband. Your adornment must not be merely external. He goes on to clarify. We know this is true because verse 4, he says, let it be the hidden person of the heart. Does everybody have heart right there? Is it talking about the organ that's in our body, our chest, that's pumping? No, we know that. We know better than that, don't we? When the Bible talks about the heart, it's talking about the mind. All right? It's talking about how someone thinks. It's the hidden person of the mind. It's your personality. That's what's going to be important. Your adornment must be what's in the heart. Not with imperishable quality. Things that don't go away. The gold and the silver, the jewelry that you may wear can wear out. You braid your hair and eventually you've got to unbraid it. Your dresses wear out. External things are going to wear out. But what lasts forever is a gentle and quiet spirit. And so he instructs these wives who are in this situation where they want to win their husbands over for the Lord to do it in this way. She's evangelistic in her heart, evangelistic in her attitude, evangelistic in her submissiveness to her husband. And he says when she behaves this way, Peter says that it is precious in the sight of the Lord. And then you've got verses 5 through 6. He says, for in this way in the former times, holy women also. I wonder who he's talking about here. We know at least one example that he's talking about because he's going to mention her specifically by name. But he has this word women in the plural sense. So I wonder about if he's thinking about Ruth or Esther. Thinking about those wives who set the example in their lives with their husbands.
Yep.
Other women. Yes, ma'am.
We never mentioned Mrs. Noah.
Yeah, I know, Mrs. Noah.
I would think she's a prime example.
She is.
Somebody who'd get on a big old boat,
Right.
not knowing what's going to happen. Seeing
Yeah.
all those animals coming in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's a good point to bring out. Matter of fact, by the end of the chapter, he mentions Noah by name too, doesn't he? We'll get there. The whole ark situation is mentioned by the end of the chapter. All right, so that's a good point to bring out. All these women. I wonder who he had in mind. Maybe these are a few. He says, who also hoped in who? Their husbands? Do what they should do. Yeah, I know, right? Sometimes husbands are not obedient. People who hope in God, who adorned themselves. How? By being submissive. Mrs. Noah got on the boat. She got on the boat. Raised those 3 other boys with her husband. That's a big deal. What'd you say? Go ahead.
And lived with 3 daughters-in-law.
Right, exactly. That took a lot, didn't it? It's a good point. But they hoped in God, and they adorned themselves. Here's this word again. Adorn yourself with what? What do you put on? It's not the... Verse 3 says, your adornment must not be merely external. It's not the physical things that this sweet wife puts on that makes her such a precious thing in the sight of God. But it's the character that she has, the example that she sets. And so she adorns herself with not the external things, but she...
Now there it would be in the heart. It would be the heart, I think.
Yeah, well, that's it, right. That's what it
Not
says.
the heart of the mind, not the mind, but the heart. With her doing that,
I don't understand what you're saying.
what you just read, her submitting and comes from her heart, wanting to be there to raise her kids, to be there for her husband, to teach him.
Yeah, but that's still the mind, though. It's a mindset.
Yeah.
It's not the physical pumping organ in your chest.
So you telling me you just automatically like this? You just got to practice on being a good one. You just automatically just Cupid and everything. You got to just practice on being a good husband. You got to practice on being a good wife, or it's just automatic.
Oh, it's not automatic. No, not at all. Yes, sir.
I think I'm understanding what your dad's saying, because I'm agreeing with it. The heart is not just your mind.
Yeah, it's an emotion.
It's your inner self.
Sure.
It takes in a whole lot more than just what you think. It takes in like you're saying, the emotions.
Yeah.
Everything. It's the true you.
Yeah, that's right.
If you're showing your heart, you can't hide.
Yeah,
A lot of times when you find somebody, you see what they let you see.
yeah, that's
When
right.
you look at their heart, and you know what the true person is.
That's right. Yeah, it's the emotion. Is that what you're talking about?
It's more
Yeah.
than just emotions. It's your mind. It's a combination of a
Yeah,
lot
that's
of
right.
things. It's like if you think of the heart of the city, you're looking at the center of the city.
Uh-huh.
When you look up
Who they really are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The center of them.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's who they are. All right, so let's see. Submissive to her. Let me get back to where I was here.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Oh, used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands. And then he gives the example, verse 6. Just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you have become her children if you do what is right without frightening or any fear. And so you want to be confident like Sarah. Sarah was so confident in what she was doing as a good wife that she did not think anything of it to be submissive to her husband Abraham and even calling him Master, Lord, doing what he said. That's her confidence. It's not that she has a lower position than Abraham. She has a different role perhaps than Abraham did. But she is confident in knowing that she's doing what is right by calling him Master or calling him Lord, as the text says. And so a Christian woman has character, strength, and peace, which are really what her inner beauty is all about. These are the things she concentrates on rather than the outward beauty. These are the things that her husband will notice and continue to cherish long after the outward beauty may fade away. Sarah was such a woman, and it was in her strength and peace that enabled her to submit to Abraham without any fear. When someone is submitting out of fear, that's not a good situation. You do what is right because you're afraid of what may happen. That's what I meant to say. That's not the situation here with Sarah. She wants to do what is asked. She wants to do what she can do to please her husband, not because she fears her husband, but because she loves her husband. And that's a big difference.
It's the only thing he's saying, the only thing you do is just fear God. That's the only thing. Not even fear her husband.
Yeah, that's right. God. Fear God. You do. Isn't that but you know what's so interesting about this? That's a good point, really. The point is that every person can look at these qualities that are mentioned here about a wife and say, I want to be that. I want to be that. I want to be that person that's not concerned about the outward things, the external things, and I want to be concerned about how I can have good character. That's everybody. Everybody should have that respect and fear towards the Lord, and respect and fear towards others in a humble way. Yeah. All right. Any questions? I don't know if I even hit the text at all. Yeah, I guess I did. I put that up there. That's verse 1 through 2. Yeah, Peter is speaking. I had some notes in here. Peter is speaking to married pagans because it seems that there may have been a question about how a Christian's role would be in that situation. So that's what this is all about. I just want to make sure I'm hitting everything that I put in my notes there. Good. Yeah. Okay. Any questions at all about that little section there?
I guess really as
I was waiting. I gave you plenty of time.
as a woman who, just imagine what that would take, how much honor and respect a woman like that needs who is married to somebody that's not a Christian. And it says not to say a word. I mean, I would have the need to say, oh, yes, you are going to do
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
I want you to do. And so we need to realize that we just skim over that because it doesn't all apply to us, but it's not an easy.
Well, our culture makes us think that it doesn't apply to us. Our culture says that a woman should be even disrespectful to her husband to get him to do what she wants, and that's not what the Bible teaches. But let me tell you something: husbands shouldn't be disrespectful to their wives just to get what they want either. It goes both ways. But our culture is certainly one that teaches that women can take more of a leadership role in the family. And I'm not even talking about in the church. I'm talking about just in the family. But that's not the way it is all over the world. That's not the way it is, the way that God designed it. God designed for the man to be the leader in the home. Christian or not, that's the way God designed it. Adam and Eve weren't Christians, were they?
No.
They were followers of God, but they didn't even know anything about Christ. But God set it up in such a way that Adam was to be the leader.
And oftentimes in the Bible when it's talking about what we should do and what we should not do, it's not talking about every situation. We don't have to analyze what if my husband does this, what if my husband does that. It's about a general idea of what a woman should be like, or if we read what a man should be like. And we don't have to say if my husband yells at me.
Yeah, that's where I was
going to
go
be
with.
Disrespectful.
Yeah.
It's talking about, this is your general idea of how you should behave.
It'd be real easy for someone to say, yeah, well, my husband beats me, or my husband hurts me, or he's verbally abusive to me. Am I supposed to just do what Peter says right here? Listen, that's not what it's talking about here. It doesn't fit this. Good point.
Another thing with Miss Mills talk. I got a wife don't even believe nothing, And I still come to church. It even draws down on me sometimes. Well, I'm even going, ain't nothing happened. Then all of a sudden, I got a son that got baptized. All of a sudden, I got a little girl coming now.
Sure.
I like, okay, I see some hope in that. That's what I'm talking about. So, as long as I don't give up, just keep on running.
That's right. Well, in the next section, get ready here.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
It's still talking about being submissive, isn't it? Talking about how to have a submissive heart, and he gives instructions to the husbands. And here's what he says. He gives the character of an understanding husband is one that is compassionate. Has compassionate understanding and provides honor as a partner in the relationship. And he is prayerful. Peter now speaks to the husbands on the flip side of this issue. And pagan husbands will act as they will with only the Christian attitude of their wives to save them. And Christian husbands, however, have the responsibility to know or to understand, that's the word that he uses here, understand their wives and the special needs that they have because they're women, they're mothers, and asked by God to submit to their husbands. And if that's the case, if she's going to be submissive to her husbands, how should that husband respond to that? Well, he needs to be compassionate and understanding and not harsh. For husbands not to carefully provide that understanding and care is to hinder their own spiritual lives. And the best compliment from a wife to her husband is when she's able to say to him, you know me so well. You know me. All right, so let's look at the text and see this. All right? Verse 7. Verse 7. He says, you husbands in the same way. Now notice what he says right there. In the same way, very beginning of chapter 3. In the same way, wives. Well, what's the same way he's talking about? The example of Jesus. In the same way that Jesus was submissive. In the same way that Jesus was compassionate. Wives and husbands are to be like Jesus. And so he says, in the same way you wives, and now he says, you husbands in the same way. Live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life. So that, to me, this is a scary verse for the amount of pressure that's put on men to do what is right. Okay, here's what he says. He says that they have this responsibility to understand their wives. First of all, you know where I'm going, don't you? How in the world? That's difficult. It's difficult to understand. And really, but the thing is it's not about knowledge. That's the difference. It's a different kind of understanding. To understand something is to know it in such a way that you can respond to it. To know something is just have the facts. To be knowledgeable about something. Really what Peter may be talking about here is being wise. Understanding, having the knowledge and being able to apply it. Understanding your wives. And so he says Christian husbands are to know or to understand their wives and those things that she has to deal with. That they're not to live with their wives in such a way that they don't consider and are compassionate towards them. Live with your wives in an understanding way. And notice what he says, as someone who is what? What does your version say? Does everybody have weaker? Weaker. Is a wife physically weaker? She can be. It's not always the case. She can be. She can be. And most times she might be. Physically a weaker person. Is she weaker spiritually? She can be, She could be weaker spiritually. Is she weaker intellectually? She could be. She could be. Just not as knowledgeable as her husband. Could be the case. But I don't think those things like that are necessarily what he's talking about. I think it's just in general, he's talking about her being a weaker physical person. The spiritual, I don't think that's what he's talking about. I don't think he's talking about intellectually or the capabilities of a woman not being the same as a man. That's not what he's talking about. I think he's saying, be good to your wives because you're supposed to protect her. You're supposed to be the person that helps her. And she's weaker. And you are to be there, live with your wives in such a way that she feels safe and confident in her life with you.
I told my wife I was the head of the household. She put me in the doghouse. I don't know what I did wrong.
Well, here's the thing. Here's what I would suggest. Pause for a moment. Don't stop telling her that you're the head of the household.
Goodness.
You don't have to, don't tell her that. Live that way.
Live that way.
That's going to make the big difference. And then you don't be necessarily put in and I've talked to you about, I'm sorry, we keep talking. We've discussed this.
Yes, we have.
When you serve her, she needs to be the head of the household.
Big slave.
Not slave. The servant, as in the way that Jesus served. He's the example. In the same way you wives, in the same way you husbands. And so you serve your wife, and wives serve your husbands in the way that Jesus would. Then you don't have to tell them anything. Your example sets the tone for how the relationship should be.
And if you're going to show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of
Sure.
God, then you're
Man,
not
that's
going to talk down to her or
That's right.
think that you're smarter or you're...
Alex,
Yes, ma'am.
we had a friend that said in front of his wife and us, my wife will obey me.
Oh, God.
If that friend
Okay.
had
He got
been
shot.
my husband,
Right.
we would have had a conversation when I got home.
Yeah.
But that's not the way a husband should be.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And some act like it,
I won't say it again.
but don't say it.
Boy,
Let me see what friend you are.
When Kira and I got married, the fellow that performed our wedding ceremony, his name's Don Cantor. He actually passed away not that long ago. And Kira and I have been married 20 years this May, and we're thankful for that. But on our wedding day, in the wedding ceremony, Brother Don Cantor, I don't know if it was a slip up or what, but you can go back and watch the tape because our wedding is on a tape. And he said that I should obey Kira. And I've tried ever since because it was in the thing.
I know my father told me, he said he was my best friend. He said, you know, you just hand-picked.
Yeah.
They said, I must be picked by the right hand, I guess. And so I didn't.
The thing is it really doesn't bother me to obey my wife. It really doesn't. And it shouldn't for any husband to do what your wife asks you to do. Why? And the text tells us. She is a fellow heir. She's a fellow heir with you of this great thing that you're a part of. This wonderful kingdom. You're going to heaven together. And for you to do what she's asking you to do, good grief, get over yourself and just do it. Because you're going to heaven together. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a great thing. What an honor it is that you're going to do what you're going to obey your wife because you're both benefiting from the freedom and the blessings that are found in Jesus Christ. That's a beautiful thing. Miss Sonia, you had something.
Well, I think that in a nutshell, a husband needs to make his wife happy
Sure.
to be submissive,
Oh, yeah, that's it.
to make her want to be.
Yeah,
Because submissive has gotten such a negative connotation.
right.
But in this, it's not negative.
Right.
When we taught the girls' class many, many years ago, we tried to teach them about the word submissive and what it meant here.
Yeah.
And that this is something that you want to be.
Yeah.
Because the way your wife treats you, and my husband does very well, it makes me want to be submissive.
Sure.
And we explain that as more of a helpmeet.
Yeah.
To help make him better is what that submissiveness meant. Not that we were necessarily less than him.
Yeah.
But it's more of a helpmeet and something you want to do because he makes you proud to be that way.
Yes.
Because of the way he treats you.
Paul writes about this and says that wives are to be submissive as to the Lord. In the same way that anybody should be submissive to the Lord, a wife is to be submissive to her husband. But really, I'm telling you, it's a two-way street. Husbands are to love their wives in such a way that she would want to be that way, because that's the way that Christ loves the church, and we want to be submissive. That's what Paul says. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church. And when that relationship is that healthy, then there's cohesiveness in the relationship and in the family. Does that make sense?
Is there any room for ego and pride in the marriage?
I don't think so. There's not room for ego and pride in Christianity.
Okay.
You have to completely, what does Jesus say? Deny yourself and follow me. You have to give up everything that you are.
And if you work on yourself and not try to beat them into that.
That's exactly right.
It won't work. Here, mine said in NIV, husbands in the same way be considerate.
Oh, yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Because that gives, I like the considerate because that gives the idea of you consider it. You hear the difference that I'm saying? You're considerate, and then you actually consider something. You're thinking about it. And you're living in such a way that you're compassionately understanding with your wife. Good.
Alex, I'll try to be quiet after this.
Okay, not worried.
Ephesians 5 goes along with this. First, it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ.
Yeah.
And then it goes on and talks about the wives and the husbands.
Yes, that's right.
So,
It's the same pattern, isn't it? This is the way that we should be towards Christ, and then this is the way that husbands are to be to their wives, and the way that wives should be to their husbands. And so the same pattern is found here in Peter. Jesus sets this example. We want to be submissive to him in the same way that he was submissive. And then wives do this, and then husbands do this as well. It's following the same pattern, which tells me that the Holy Spirit must have wrote both of those. Don't you think? I think so. But notice this. Did you hear this warning? This is the scary part for me. The text says, let me see if I've got this up here. I want to make sure we have this. No, I guess it is verse 7. Yeah, here it is. Do you see this last phrase? So that your prayers will not be hindered. Which tells me, I hope I'm not reading too much into this, and you tell me if I am. But if a husband doesn't behave this way, then his prayers are hindered. Is that true? Would you say that that's a true statement?
So if his prayer is hindered, do they hinder the whole family? Or do you just hinder him?
Well, it just says him.
No. Okay.
So
Your
Alex,
prayers,
when-
yes.
You're right, scary. And when I read that, I think, okay, so how does that happen?
Mm-hmm.
And my first thought is, it's not that God is hearing the prayer and chooses not to answer
Sure.
the request, but rather, if you're not doing this, your prayer life's probably not helping.
That's it.
Right?
That's it, Zach. Your prayer life is non-existent, probably. Because if you're praying and you've got this good relationship with God, then you're probably going to be doing the things that that a husband should do, is what Peter is mentioning right here. But I do know that, I also know that it could be, I don't like to get into too much detail like what Seth was saying. We don't want to pick this apart. But it could be a situation where a husband can think, I'm going to follow God, I'm going to follow God, I'm going to follow God no matter what, and then be mean to his wife at home.
No, that ain't gonna.
And that ain't going to work. Yes, sir.
I was sitting here thinking about Kay and I's situation, and it's different to what it used to be, because she's had to take on roles that make me uncomfortable, because she does things that she has to do things that I just can't do anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so it all goes back to being a team.
Sure.
And I try to do what I can, but it's not very much these days.
Yeah, that's right.
But it has to be a team thing, and without using those exact words, but I think the way my dad used to talk about my mother was that he put her up on a pedestal because that was his special person.
Mm-hmm.
And I try unsuccessfully sometimes to do that with Kay.
Sure.
But here's the thing. It's all about the teamwork. There's going to be those good times that the men are going to do a really good job. But if you get on the other side of it,
Yeah,
sometimes we do a terrible job.
sure.
Maybe I'm the only one here that way.
No, I don't think so. The other day, I'll give you a quick example, and then we'll probably stop with this because I don't want to necessarily go into. Well, we might get it a little bit, but we'll see what happens. I'm at the close to the finish line of finishing this degree that I'm working on, a Master of Divinity, and it is stressful at times. And this last week or so has been even more stressful. I had Tim Nelson living with me for about a week and a half or so, and I love Tim Nelson, but there are more responsibilities when he's living with me, right? And I had this paper that I had to write, which is turned out to be a wonderful paper, and I'll share it with anybody. It's about what the 2nd and 3rd century Christians understood about baptism. It's really interesting. But I had been working on it for weeks now, doing all this research, and I needed to finish it up, and it's due tonight. And I could not. Friday night, I needed to finish it up. I worked pretty much all day Friday getting this thing done, and I couldn't get any further. And sometimes you just can't think anymore. And I said, I don't know what to do, Kira. I said, I've got this to do and this to do, and you've got all this list of things to do. And she said, well, let me just come up to your office and let's work on it together. And so we did that. And yesterday we spent about 3-4 hours fixing anything grammatically that needed to be done. And well, Kira and I were talking about how Trey and Lee Morgan talk about how the relationship with a husband and wife should always be at 100%. Not 50-50. If I'll just put in 50%, she'll put in 50%. No, they're talking about everybody working to put in 100% of who you are. But sometimes I've only got 80%. Sometimes I can't put in what I need to. And that's when the other spouse has to put in 120% to make up the difference.
So, brother, do you have to be 20 years, 30 years married when we first started out? First 5 years?
I don't know.
Different,
That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't think it's a matter of years.
It don't matter years, huh?
But all I know is that marriage is a two-way street, and you're on the same street together, and you're working together, and it's a team effort. And that's what that's where I was going with it. Brother Roy talks about being a team. Yeah. And sometimes one person on the team has to pull the weight of the other person on the team. And when you live with your wife in a considerate, compassionate, understanding way, because of your love that you're showing to her, she is going to be submissive to you and adorn herself, not with the external things and worry about those things, but providing gentle, spiritual understanding and love in the relationship as well. It's both ways. Both ways. I don't know it all. I've seen great examples of wonderful marriages, and I'm working my way through one myself. Yeah. But that's just the way it is. Okay, that's a good place to stop. Thank you all so much.
You did an outstanding job, bro.